Day 5. I know I didn't record yesterday. I do apologize, but it was good reason. We did get our visa. Me and Hassan got our visa for Indonesia, so we're now definitely going. Now the only thing we're worrying about is luggage, because our luggages aren't luggaging. The kids all over the place. But we'll figure it out. We're smart kids. We'll figure it out. We got a second cream. So after this, we're vaccinated. Never again. Never seen it again in my life. Yeah. That's all. What else? I got complimented today about my legs. Bro, if you guys know, I'm basically disabled. Like, my knees don't work. Like, I've always had skinny legs. I don't know if you can't even see them. Like, you can't, anyway, you'll see them sometime. But they're bad. But some guy said today, like, oh, you've got nice legs. So that was a good compliment. I was really excited. Really happy about that. But yeah, okay, let's go. 10 minutes. Competition neglect. It is tempting to explain entrepreneurial optimism by wishful thinking. But emotion is only part of the story. Cognitive bases play an important role. Notably, the System 1 feature, what you see is all there is. We focus on our goal, anchor on our plan, and neglect relevant base rates, exposing ourselves to the planning fallacy. We focus on what we want to do and can do, neglecting the plans and skills of others. Both in explaining the past and in predicting the future, we focus on the casual role of skill and neglect the role of luck. We therefore fall into an illusion of control. We focus on what we know and neglect what we do not know, which makes us overly confident in our beliefs. The observation that 90% of drivers believe they are better than average is a well-established psychological finding that has become part of the culture. And it often comes up as a prime example of a more general above-average effect. However, the interpretation of the finding has changed in recent years. From self-aggrandizement, crazy words, to cognitive biases. Consider these questions. Are you a good driver? Are you better than average? I say me, I'm okay. Maybe a bit above average. Anyway, yapping. The first question is easy, and the answer comes quickly. Most drivers say yes. The second question is much harder than for most respondents, almost impossible to answer seriously and correctly, because it requires an assessment of other average quality of drivers. At this point in the book, it comes as no surprise that people respond to a difficult question by answering an easier one. They compare themselves to the average without ever thinking about the average. Oh, the evidence for the cognitive interpretation of the above average effect is that when people are asked about the task they find difficult, for many of us, this could be, are you better than average in starting conversation with strangers? They readily rate themselves as below average. The upshot is that people tend to overly optimistic about their relative standing on any activity in which they do moderately well. I have had several occasions to ask founders and participants in innovative startups a question: to what extent will the outcome of your effort depends on what you do in your form? This is evidently an easy question. The answer comes quickly, and in any small sample, it has never been less than 80%, even when they are not sure they will exceed. These bold people think their fate is almost entirely in their own hands. They are surely wrong. The outcome of a startup depends as much on the achievements of its competitors and on changes in the market as on its own efforts. However, what you see is all there is. Plays its part. The entrepreneurs naturally focus on what they know are best. Their plans and actions and the most immediate threats and opportunities, such as the above ability of funding. They know less about their competitors, and therefore find it natural to imagine a future in which the competition plays little part. Colin Camera and Dan Lovallo, who coined the concept of competition neglect, illustrated it with a quote from their chairman of Disney Studios, asked why so many expensive big-budget movies are released on the same days, such as a Memorial or Independence Day. He replied, hubris. If you only think about your own business, you think, I've had a good story department. I've got a good marketing department. we're going to go out and do this, and you don't think that everybody else is thinking the same way, in a given weekend in a year, you have 5 movies open, and there's certainly not enough people to go around. The candid answer refers to hubris, but it displays no arrogance, no conceit of superiority not to competing studios. The competition is simply not part of the decision in which a difficult question has again been replaced by an easier one. The question that needs an answer is this: considering what the others will do, how many people will see our film? The question a studio executive consider is simpler and refers to knowledge that is most easily available to them. Do we have a good film and a good organization to market it? The familiar system 1 process of all you see is all there is, and substitution produce both competition neglect and the above average effect. The consequence of a competition neglect is excess entry. More competitors enter the market than the market can profitably sustain. So the average outcome is a loss. The outcome is disappointing for the typical entrant in the market, but the effect on the economy as a whole could well be positive. In fact, Giovanni Dossi and Don Lavolo call entrepreneurial firms that fail but signal new markets to more qualified competitors. Optimistic matters. Good for the economy, but bad for the investors. For a number of years, professors at Duke University conducted a survey in which the chief financial officers of large corporations estimated the returns of the Standard and Poor Index over the following year. The Duke scholars collected 11,600 such forecasts and examined their accuracy. The conclusion was straightforward. Financial officers of large corporations had no clue about the short-term future of the stock market. The correlation between the estimates and the true value was slightly less than 0. When they said the market would go down, it was slightly more likely than not that it would go up. These findings are not surprising. The truly bad news is that the CFOs did not appear to know that their forecasts are worthless. In addition to their best guess about S&P returns, the participations provided 2 other estimates, a value that they are 90% sure would be too high and one that they were 90% sure it would be too low. The range between the 2 values is called an 80% confidence interval, and outcomes that fall outside the interval are labeled surprises. An individual who sets confidence intervals on multiple occasions expects about 20% of the outcomes to be surprised. As frequently happens in such exercises, there were far too many surprises. Their included was 67%, more than 3 times higher than expected. Itchy man. This shows that CFOs were grossly overconfident about their ability to forecast the market. Overconfidence is another manifestation of what you see is all there is. When we estimate a quantity, we rely on information that comes to mind and construct a coherent story in which the estimate makes sense, allowing for the information that does not come to mind. Perhaps because one never knew it, it is impossible. The authors calculated the confidence intervals that would have been reduced the incidence of surprises back to 20%. The results were striking. To maintain the rate of surprises at the desired level, the CFO should have said, year after year, there is an 80% chance that the S&P return next year will be between 10 and 30%. The confidence interval that probably reflects the CFO's knowledge more precisely than the ignorance is more than 4 times wider than the intervals they actually stated. Social psychology comes into the picture here, because the answer that the truthful CFO would offer is painfully ridiculous. A CFO who informs his colleagues that there is a good chance that the S&P returns will be between 10 and 30% can expect to be laughed out of the room. The wide confidence interval is a confession of ignorance, which is not socially acceptable for someone who is paid to be knowledgeable in financial matters. Even if they knew how little they know, the executives would be penalized for admitting it. President Truman famously asked for a one-armed economist who would take a clear stand. He was sick and tired of economists who kept saying, on the other hand. Organizations that take the word for overconfident experts can expect costly consequences. The study of CFOs showed that those who were most confident and optimistic about the S&P index were also overconfident and optimistic about the prospects of their own firm, which went on to take more risks than others. As Nassim Taleb had argued, inadequate appreciation of the uncertainty of the environment inevitably leads economic agents to take risks they should avoid. However, optimism is highly valued socially and in the market. People and firms reward the providers of dangerously misleading information more than they reward the truth tellers. One of the lessons of the financial crisis that led to the Great Recession is that there are periods in which competition among experts and among organizations creates powerful forces that favor a collective blindness to risk and uncertainty. The social and economic pressures that favor overconfidence are not restricted to financial forecasting. Other professionals must deal with the fact that an expert worthy of the name is expected to display high confidence. Philip Tetlock observed that the most overconfident experts were the most likely to be invited to strut their stuff in the news shows. Overconfidence also appears to be endemic in medicine. A study of patients who died in the ICU compared autopsy results with the diagnosis that physicians had provided while the patients were still alive. Physicians also reported their confidence. The result, clinicians who were completely certain of the diagnosis antemortem, well, these words are crazy, antemortem were wrong 40% of the time. Here again, expert overconfidence is encouraged by their clients. Generally, it is considered a weakness and a sign of vulnerability for clientele, for clinicians to appear unsure. Confidence is valued over uncertainty that there is prevailing censor against disclosing uncertainty to patients. Experts who acknowledge the full extent of their ignorance may expect to be replaced for more confident competitors who are better able to gain the trust of clients. An unbiased appreciation of uncertainty is a cornerstone of rationality, but it is not what people and organizations want. Extreme uncertainty is paralyzing. Under dangerous circumstances, and the admission that one is merely guessing is especially unacceptable when the stakes are high. Acting on pretended knowledge is often the preferred solution. Wow, leave that. When they come together, the emotional, cognitive, and social factors that support exaggerated optimism are a heady brew, okay, which sometimes leads to people to take risks that they would avoid if they know the odds. There are no evidence that risk takers in the economic domain have an unusual appetite for gambles on high stakes. They are merely less aware of risks that more timid people are. Dan Lovallo and I coined the phrase bold forecasts and timid decisions to describe the background of risk-taking. Okay, 10 minutes. Let me put it there. Tomorrow it's probably going to be a new chapter. And yeah, man, see you tomorrow. Oh, okay. We're live.